questions?
Thank you.
And it's not coming up yet, so I'm
The
streaming,
sound?
but it's not showing as live. So there's a lot of times a delay.
Okay.
Sometimes it's 30 seconds, sometimes like one time it was like 20 minutes,
Okay.
which is why I have Jared check it every time so that we don't miss valuable information. But he's just seeing one. We're in? Okay.
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 The time is now 4 o'clock and we'll call the meeting to order. Approval of the agenda. Do I have a motion?
I move that we approve the agenda.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. George, will you please lead us?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Christy, do we have any public comments? Hearing none, we'll move on. We do have one action item for the preschool and elementary Title I summer school fees. Dr. J, would you like to?
Yeah, Madam President, members of the board and guests, fees are located in there. It was just, I believe, an oversight when we brought the other fees to you at the time, and so we wanted to bring that back and make sure that we were able to offer that programming as well to the families that are interested in it. So I can take any questions you have.
Do we have anyone registered so far, or are they waiting for us to approve the fee to know whether they'll register?
Preschool is waiting. We do have interest in the Title I summer reading.
Do we have any ESY kiddos for the preschool summer school, or is that different than, obviously, the fee, but?
I'll have to get back to you on that, on how many. But I think it's more, what the understanding I had was it was more of an opportunity for kids at that age to take summer school more than anything.
Cool.
Yeah.
My only question was why the date difference? Why are we offering a much more, like a longer program at the preschool versus the elementary?
Just the need for that age kid. We're trying to attract more, with preschool, the more we can offer in the morning, at night, and in the break time in the summer, the better opportunity I think we have to get parents to stay with us and not have to try something different or have a change to their schedule.
Okay. Any other questions regarding the preschool or Title I fee? Okay. Hearing none, do I have a motion?
I move we approve the preschool and Title I reading summer school fee for 2023.
I second. I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next up is the public hearing on the revised budget for the 22-23 school year. The board needs to vote to suspend the regular meeting to conduct a public hearing, which is consistent with ARS statute. So do I have a motion to suspend the regular meeting?
I motion that we suspend the regular meeting to conduct a public hearing on the revised budget for 2022-2023.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Meeting is suspended.
Good evening, Madam President, members of the board, Dr. J. So hope you guys don't mind me pinch hitting for Tyler tonight to go through the budget revision for you.
Sure.
So first, looking at the overall timeline for the budget, when you look at a fiscal year, typically we'll kick off a fiscal year with a proposed budget. The deadline for that is July 5th, but most districts do that in June. So in June, we're kicking off the proposed budget. And then by July 15th, you have to have your adopted budget. And then you'll go through the year. We'll have a major revision on December 15th. And then now this is the final revision for the year with the May 15th revision. Even though it's the final revision, most of this stuff is not locked in. There's a process that school districts can go through whenever there is something that's found that needs correction. So if during the course of an audit or something, we discover something we need to go back and revise, we can do that later. That's called the 15-9-15 process. Because we are so creative, we just named the process after the statute that covers it. That's typically how Arizona does it, you know, Prop 301 funds still get called Prop 301. That's just what we do. So the only thing that really gets locked in is just the allocation between capital and M&O. So how you're allocating your funds tonight, that is one thing that can't be changed after tonight. So that would just be locked in. But everything else is subject to the 15-9-15 process to go back and revise in the event that there was anything that was found to be miscalculated as we go through audited financials.
And just because we have new members, can you explain why, for anyone listening, why Fountain Hills didn't have to do a December revision?
Absolutely, Madam President. So December 15th revisions are not required unless you are over budgeted. So when the state calculates your budget limits, if they see the amount that you budgeted for when you started the year is higher and exceeds that by more than 100,000 or 1% of your total budget, then they will require you to revise by December 15th. If that is not the case, then it's optional. I usually think it's good practice to just go ahead and revise every December 15th. It's not a requirement, though. It's only a requirement if you're over budgeted. Since we've moved on to current year counts, we used to be funded completely on prior year counts. But since we've moved on to current year counts, it is more often than not that a lot of districts get required to revise by December 15th, since you're basically doing a guess when you start off the year on what you think your subsequent year's count's going to be. And a lot of districts tend to just start and assume that their count for next year is going to be about the same as their count for the current year. But if you're in a declining district and you happen to go down by the time the school year starts or as you get through the school year, then you get stuck revising December 15th to update to that student count. But that's the only time they're required is if you're found to be over budgeted. And a lot of times that's traced back to a change in student count. Your student count has declined from where you expected to be when you went into the school year.
Thank you.
All right, so Tyler has plotted out your guys' most recent average daily membership trends. And so you can see those, kind of the trajectory that you're on. And so, being here for several of your other conversations, I see that the district is making plans on how to get acclimated to where the ADM trajectories are going to go. A lot of districts will, and I'm not sure the last time you guys have, but a lot of districts every now and then will employ a demographer to kind of give like a long-range projection. Applied economics is one of the typical ones that are out there giving long-range projections. If you need any type of assessment on your area, figure out where you're going to be over the next 20 years, so you can plan accordingly. You can see that overall, for the most part, you do have a downward trend on your average daily membership. A lot of that has to do with housing prices. The housing prices out here, it's not very affordable for a young family to be living out here. I mean, it's beautiful, but just not very affordable for a young family. So a lot of times that has to relate to it. Some of the movement the state has been making with universal empowerment scholarship accounts, universal expansion in that area, making it more affordable for people to go to private school. That doesn't help any. All the new charters that keep springing up, that doesn't help any. So there are other factors, but you can see that your ADM has, for the most part, been on a downward trend lately. Yes.
Can you just give a quick explanation, the difference between ADM and actual enrollment, just for anyone listening?
Absolutely.
Those numbers are quite different.
Absolutely. So enrollment reflects how many students are physically present at a point in time. One most common point in time is October 1st. And so let's say on October 1st, let's do a head count. How many students are enrolled with the district on that day, on October 1st? But average daily membership is what we get funded off of. And average daily membership is reflective of how many students are with you throughout the first 100 days of your school calendar. In addition to that, if you're a kindergartner, you only get counted as a half a person. So I don't know, maybe because they're little, but we only want to fund half for kindergarten, even though most districts and even a lot of charters still have a full-day kindergarten program. When Napolitano left office, even though that was something she championed and brought forward, it was quick to follow her out the door, and we no longer fund full-day kindergarten. And so kindergarten is only counted as half. So they count as half ADM. Even though they count as one whole enrollment, they count as half for ADM purposes. Additionally, whenever someone attends anyone subsequent to you or concurrent with you. So let's say that if they're attending your school, but they're also doing online classes with, an online charter or even an online district at this point, now that we have that also universally expanded, your average daily membership gets reduced. So every day they spend with someone else, your average daily membership gets reduced. And the reason why that happens is because the state, during the Great Recession, decided they were no longer going to pay for more than one ADM, with exceptions for CTEDs, right? But for the most part, they're not going to pay for more than one ADM. So what that means is if someone was with you for the entire year, all 180 days of your school calendar, but then they go and do summer school, right? You're not going to get paid for a full student. They're going to get paid for a fractional student because they took summer school, and they're going to take some of your money to go pay the person who gave them summer school. That's the way our system works. Now, I've given countless analogies on how ridiculous that is, but that's what our state does right now, is they will reduce, despite the fact you have given them a full year's worth of education, if they take education from anyone else at any point in time during that year, they will reduce your average daily membership and use that money to go pay the other person who also provided some education for the student in the course of that year. So that's kind of the difference between the two numbers.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
It also is affected by attendance.
Not so much on attendance as it used to be. So we used to have an excessive absence factor, and if a student wasn't attending, then you would have to have only under certain reasons, like widespread outbreak and stuff like that, could we get around an excessive absence factor. But they took that one away back in like early 2000s. And now attendance really only hurts you if they miss 10 consecutive days unexcused, because if they miss 10 consecutive days unexcused, then you have to drop them. But most of the funding right now is tied to enrollment, and then any concurrent and subsequent enrollments reduce your enrollment funding for the student. All right, so here are your numbers. You can see there isn't a significant change between what you adopted to start the year versus what's being revised now. And a lot of what is being changed is really just a shift. And so again, with your allocations for per pupil funding, you can push it towards capital, or you can push it towards maintenance and operations. In a lot of cases, when you have another source available that can take care of the majority of your capital needs, you'll see districts tend to want to allocate most of their funds towards maintenance and operations, used for salaries and positions. But when you don't have that consistent source available on the capital side, like a capital override or a strong bond program, then that's when you see a lot of that district additional assistance will stay with capital. And so it's really just based on your needs. So Tyler has worked closely with Dr. J to figure out the district's needs and where those funds need to be allocated. And so they made some adjustments for this revision, where you see your general budget limit, your maintenance and operations funding is being increased. But that's with a reduction on your capital side. So some of those funds have been shifted over from capital over to maintenance and operations to keep your funding in line with the needs for the district. All right, now that was the extent of the slides, but I will give you guys a preview and still some of Tyler's thunder for next month when he comes to talk to you about proposed budget. Because luckily, we're in May and we actually have a state budget. And even though that is supposed to normally be the case, it has not been for some time. So we're happy that a budget is completed now at a normal person's time right here in May. Some of the things that were passed in that state budget include $300 million that's going out for one-time funding. Your share of that should be about $336,000. That calculation is easy enough to do because we have $75 million that goes out in one-time funding through Prop 123, and that gets line itemed out on your Budget 25 report. It's actually even line itemed out on this budget that you guys are approving. You can see that on page 7. There's a little line item down there that says Prop 123 funds, and it's roughly, I'm going to say like maybe 84,000, I think, if I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. But there's a little line item down there on page 7 that says 84. So that was off the 75 million. They're going to distribute the 300 million the same way, which makes the math easy because you just multiply that number by 4. That's how much you're getting off the 300 million. The base level for the student count is going to go up by 2% for inflation. The state is required to give us the lesser of 2% or inflation. And so since that is the bare minimum requirement, that is what we're getting. We are getting the 2%. So they are meeting the requirement. The last couple of years have been a little bit better, where we've gotten even closer to true inflation. But this year, it's looking like 2%. So they've already voted on it. It's already been signed, 2%. In addition to that 2%, they are eliminating results-based funding. So results-based funding goes away, and they're taking the funding from results-based funding, and they're going to put that towards base level. That increases the base level by an additional 0.9%. They made a small adjustment to the free and reduced price lunch weight that was added just a couple years ago, so they inched that up. I believe it went from like 0.018 to 0.022, so a little tweak on there for that extra weight for free and reduced price lunch students. They also put out $20 million to increase district additional assistance, so that's the capital funds, what's typically your capital funds. It's a pretty decent increase. It's about 8 to 9%, so that's pretty decent. That's actually pretty close to being in line with where inflation's been this past couple of years. A lot of what's driving that is that we still have an ongoing capital funding lawsuit that's been going on for about 6 to 7 years. Governor Hobbs has come in with a promise that she is going to get this lawsuit settled. That lawsuit was put on delay from trial. It'll go to trial next year. So about a year from today, actually, the trial is scheduled to resume if the state and the plaintiffs cannot come to an agreement on how to settle the capital funding lawsuit. So some of the things that we've seen with extra dedication towards capital these last few years has been as a result of the lawsuit and trying to find a way to settle the lawsuit. So they put a lot of money into building renewal grants. We've gotten district additional assistance inflated now for a couple of years, so they're trying to take little steps towards mitigating what's going to be found in the lawsuit. And so we've seen that again with another step here. Most of what happened and played out in the budget was expected. Not a ton of curveballs. I know there was a lot of promises out there that they didn't realize, but for the most part, a lot of what ended up playing out was for the most part expected, where people thought it was going to go, so for better or worse. But Tyler will have all of your guys' complete numbers when he brings you your proposed budget. If I was spitballing, I would say, you're getting 336 of one time. You're probably about 280 on your 280,000 on your ongoing increase. But Tyler will have that precise number for you when he comes back here next month to your proposed budget.
Is the results-based funding almost 1%? Does that go on top of the 2, or is that part of the 2?
Yes, Dr. J goes on top of it to
So
make
it's
it
closer to 3.
really a 2.9% increase. Now, I'd have to check if you're receiving results-based funding already, because if you are, you have to remember that you have to deduct that now because you're no longer getting
Yeah,
results-based
we used
funding.
to, but I don't think since the pandemic we have. So
Okay.
I'll check, but, so it could be as high as almost 3%.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right, with that, I can take any budget questions.
Are there questions from the board regarding the revision of the budget? There are no questions.
I have questions for Kane and Krista. Are we required to have a public hearing on this?
Yes,
Yes.
I can answer that.
Okay, and so that's part of the process. Why wasn't this done earlier and on a date that's kind of expected for people for a school board meeting? There was no way for us to have this in a regular board meeting that's been on the calendar.
Well, I can tell you that since we've been here, we have not had consistency in finance. So the only consistency we have is this man here who's been fantastic. So it really comes down to the fact that we are doing everything we can to move forward with what we have available to us. And so based on that, this was the opportunity that we had. And we are working to improve upon that. I shared that my hope is that over the summer, we'll be able to get caught up on some things when students aren't in session, so that next year we can be a little bit more ahead. I mean, the first board meeting we had, I was a nervous wreck because I didn't even have anybody. I didn't even have a finance director. I had Dr. Allen come in and consult with me just to get through the first meeting. So that's where we started, where we're at. I think this is good news. We're up students. We have some more funding coming in. We just got to keep them, and we'll continue to work to be better. That's all I can say.
Is this normally scheduled within a certain time frame? Like, does it normally happen in May?
Yes.
Like, okay, so,
It should have happened at the last board meeting. It's usually part of that board meeting, but unfortunately, we use True Professionals, which you guys have been great, because we didn't have a director of finance. And so Alicia was just hired in December, so she's not the one who created the budget. Tyler created the budget, and Tyler was not available to be here to discuss it on Tuesday during our normal board meeting. He could only be here on Thursday. That didn't work for everybody, nor could we get our agenda posted in time. And so we had to, it has to be done by today. You only have until May 15th. And so it should have been done at the May 9th board meeting, but nobody was available to do that, so we
okay,
couldn't.
and we couldn't have moved it even earlier to
He wasn't ready.
satisfy, okay. How did we get the information for this meeting out to the public? Did we send it out in email? Did we post it in the paper? I mean, we didn't have time to do that, did we?
No, but our constant contact that I sent out, I did put it in there. I sent it out to all of our staff, posted it on the website, it posted on the website Friday.
Okay.
So as soon as I have the information, I put it through all the avenues that I have access to.
And I did tell people at the May 9th meeting, when we were discussing it at the end,
Yeah.
to look for the information that it would be coming, that it would either be at the end of last week or the beginning of this week, but it had to be no later than Monday. So it was on our YouTube that this was coming.
Okay. This is just one of those things where I feel like we can do, be on top of it to make sure that our public knows, because, obviously a public hearing, you'd expect some public, and we don't really have that. So I would just encourage us being diligent in getting that out so that we can really meet that expectation and build that trust with our community. Because I feel like, having an extra scheduled meeting not on an expected evening is difficult for people.
I agree.
I know you do.
Trust me. But yeah, I mean, this has just been kind of an odd year. It's the first year we did not have an actual director of finance in-house.
Yeah, I feel like I'd have to check my notes because to that point on last Tuesday, one of our public comments, Wendy mentioned that people don't come to these meetings except for me, and I feel like last time it was an additionally scheduled meeting as well, if I'm remembering correctly. So again, that might be why we're not getting people to our budget meetings, even though they're public and people are welcome to come. If it's not on a scheduled night that's ahead of time, we publish a calendar for our board meetings. If people don't have a way to plan, we are expected to make time for these meetings, but other people might have other commitments, and it's hard for them to, with 5 days' notice, or probably less for the public, make the time to be here.
Usually the only other scheduled, like off-schedule budget meeting is in July, and it's usually because the state hasn't done their budget in time to give us time to do the public meeting, the hearing, and then actually approve it. So we've always had to push our budget meeting till almost the 15th of July, which is when it's due, because that's when the legislature finally does it. But the actual, we don't usually have to do a revision in December, so we don't have that meeting very often. And then the May meeting is usually with the second, the Tuesday meeting before it's due. So that's usually when it's been done. But July, I think in the 10 years that I've done this, it's been postponed because the state wasn't ready.
I actually pulled my minutes from last May, which was a regularly scheduled meeting, and that's when our public hearing.
That's correct, on that
I
Tuesday
pulled my
night.
minutes so I could get the verbiage for the public hearing.
Okay.
And it was May 10th.
And
Okay.
it has been almost every year. Very rarely have we ever had to move the revised budget meeting in May. It's only the July meeting that gets moved. And again, that's based on the state legislature and when they finalize their budget, because we're only allotted so much time. And there's been years they haven't been done till the end of June. So, but this revised budget is almost never moved. It's always that Tuesday in May, which next year will be Wednesday, now that we do it on the first of the month.
And Madam President, if I may add, so I know that I did 4 May revisions on the 9th. It was a very popular day. But I didn't have much of an audience for any of those May revisions either. The most popular budget that you'll get will be your proposed and adopted budget, because that one impacts the tax rate. With the May revision really just being a technical cleanup of the budget with very little substance to it compared to the adopted budget, you typically don't have a large turnout for May revisions. You have your turnout for your proposed and adopted budget, especially that proposed, because that's when they still have a chance to have influence with the board and ask the board to look at alternate scenarios. So in communities where I do get a decent audience for budgets, it's usually going to be that proposed and adopted budget where you're going to see people turn out. Especially if you're doing anything with tax rates that requires you to publish a truth and taxation notice. A truth and taxation notice will get some members of your community out.
Can you
as
explain
your
to the
board.
board what that is? The truth and
Yes,
taxation?
absolutely, Madam President. So a truth and taxation notice is required whenever you are doing something where the board has the authority to increase the tax rate without requiring the vote of the people. And so there's very limited areas where we can do that. One of them that's most common would be adjacent ways. If the district wanted adjacent ways funding, the only people that vote on that are the 5 sitting in front of me. Nobody else gets to vote on whether or not the district's going to have adjacent ways funding, and that goes directly onto the tax rate. And so because of that, in order to make members of the community aware, you have to publish a truth and taxation notice that tells them, we're going to be considering increasing your tax rate for adjacent ways. This is what the rate would have been, this is what it's going to be, and that will usually get some people to show up. So if you want an advertisement that gets people here, that's one that'll pretty effectively get your house.
Free
get your house
cookies maybe
filled.
too.
Free cookies always works too.
I just have some questions to help better understand the reallocations. And I know you might not
Absolutely.
be able to answer them and it's okay. So if I look at the adopted budget for the year versus this revised, one of the big categories that changed was the purchase services. Is that, it changed by 1.4 million? Is that due to the remodeling of the buildings and that change, or what would change the?
Can you let Jeremy know what page
No,
you're on?
page, yeah.
Page 1 of, well,
You're looking inside the actual Excel
Yes,
file.
yeah,
Yes, member
yeah.
settled. So typically, when you see a shift on purchase services, and again, without having that document in front of me, I would say that it's usually caused by either you thought you were going to be able to have some services in-house and you had to go with purchase services, or vice versa. You thought you were going to contract out and you were able to bring them in-house. So without knowing the specifics, which I'd have to get into visions and kind of pull up the history, a lot of times that might happen with occupational therapists, physical therapists. They're very expensive on the purchase service side. They typically will run 30 to 40,000 higher than having your own in-house staff. So when shifts like that are occurring, that's a lot of times what causes purchase services to go ahead and shift.
so it would, for the rest of you guys that are wondering, it's page 1 of 8. With the training that we did with Tyler, the original purchase service number was 1.2 million, 1.268, and now we're at 2.675. So it was a large, kind of alarming increase. I mean, it didn't affect the total budgeted salary number that greatly, but I was just wondering maybe what positions then that accounted for.
So it went up $1 million for maintenance and operation of plant. Number 7.
Yeah, so if it's on the plant line.
It's on 2,600
Then,
is the
yes,
account.
then it would be, if you had to contract something out, maybe you had a needs assessment conducted, maybe you did some other work in that area, but it would be some of that getting contracted out that would cause that shift. And these are shifts on budgeted numbers. It doesn't necessarily mean that there has been an expense shift. You'd have to pull up your prior year AFR to kind of see where your expense was and how this new budget is comparing to last year's expense.
Are we talking about line 7 on this page?
So,
Well, that's $1 million of it.
yeah, so this number went up by 1.4, and that is a majority of it?
Yeah, it is.
So just,
Because if you look down, if you look over at the prior year and the budget,
right,
there isn't that big a difference. Well, 400,000.
but, that is a large
Do you have any,
difference.
do you have any idea? I know we're just kind of like winging it out there. But so basically, what Libby's saying is that in the previous proposed budget, it was 1.5 million,
1.2.
1.2 million, sorry.
Yep.
And now it's at 2 point, wait, no, I lost
Yeah,
my number.
2.6.
2.6 million. Any idea?
I'm not sure, but I can look into it.
Okay, that would be, yeah,
Sorry.
just
Thank you.
so we have the information. So-
I mean, our salaries went down by that, almost that same 1 million, almost. So but just wondering.
My guess, and again, I'm not, that's why I bring them in, but my guess is that when I came in, there were a lot of salaries that were being utilized in different funding, like ESSER and different things like that. And my guess would be is that as those things were either reimbursed or cleaned up, that's where, so if the two numbers match pretty close, I would imagine that's it. But we'll get you a full detail, and then we'll post that on our website for anyone that is watching to see that, because there's an explanation for it.
Yeah, and I'm sure there is. Just it was interesting to me if we had to contract out that much in salaries, that would be.
We do have quite a few contracted employees. I don't know, I don't think it adds up to that full number, but it could be a combination of a few things. But any changes to, the budget when it comes to bringing on additional people all comes through you guys.
Right.
So there wasn't $1 million worth of new positions that came in, so.
Okay.
We'll find a summary, we'll send it, we'll post it on the website, okay?
Thank you.
And then I have two other, kind of similar, just for me to better understand, so I don't put you all through this continually.
Absolutely.
On the classroom site fund page, those
Page
numbers, it's on page 3 of 8. Between the adopted and then this revised, it went up almost $500,000. Do we know what that increase was for? Is that because of the
That would be,
raises
you're
for
talking about the
staff?
total amount went up by almost $500,000.
Yes.
So that would be a change between what you are, I'm assuming, did Tyler do the proposed and adopted this year?
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been a change between what Tyler thought your student count was going to be versus what your student count actually is.
Okay.
So when you put the proposed and adopted budget together, like, you're going to be doing the proposed and adopted again
Yep.
for next year, you're going to start that next month. So next month, you kind of have to take a guess where you think your student count's going to be. And then whatever you think that number is, multiply that by 758, because classroom site fund is going up from 708 to 758 next year. So you're going to multiply that out. First, you're going to weight it. You're going to weight it by your weights. But then you're going to multiply that number out by 758. That's going to produce a number. Now, if you guessed wrong on the student count, if you guessed a student count that's too high, then by the time you guys start doing revisions, that number's going to get dropped down. If you guess a count that's too low, when you start doing revisions, that number will get revised up. And it's really not until you get to the May 15th revision that you actually know where the final numbers are, because it's based on 100th day average daily membership. And even then, you're still not completely sure, because if any of these students go to summer school in June, your student count will be revised down when the state does a recalculation. So even now, when you're adopting this budget, your numbers could still change. If anybody's going to take any classes in June with someone else, your budget will get revised down because the state will do a recalculation on student counts.
And actually, when the proposed budget was done by the previous director, and Tyler had to, the proposed number, I remember this from the K-12 budget bill passage, when we did our raises earlier in the year, the number that was projected, I believe he thought was too high. And so we had to, the pot of money that we had available wasn't accurate because we didn't have that many students. But as the year went on, we picked up more and more students, and that's why we ended up with a positive. So that went back to the previous director, and that's why that number was changed.
Okay. And then just, again, curiosity, Why would we roll up the 2,200 and 2,100 all the way up into the 1,000 account on that page instead of continuing to keep them line itemed? Or eliminate them because they're no longer on?
Yes, so the structure and the format of the entire file is set by the Auditor General's office.
Okay.
So we don't have any way to control what the structure is. So anything that's
Well,
being
But you
combined
would have
onto a
put the
single cell.
numbers, so, and I'm sorry, on the adopted one, we had numbers in our support services students and our support services instructional staff. But
Okay.
now on this one, we only have it under the instruction. Just curious as to why those numbers would all just now be under instruction.
And that would have been a change in an assumption by Tyler at the time. So if he assumed at the time that he did your proposed budget, that some of it would be used for support staff, but then after working with the district, found out that you're only using the funds on instructional staff, then he would have made that adjustment to put the
Okay.
funds where they're actually being used.
Just a quick question, you're saying if the students take courses anywhere else, if they take summer school through us, is that also a ding or it's okay?
No, Madam President, if they're taking the classes through you, that's fine.
Okay.
If they're participating with another, and usually it's online.
Yeah.
It's over the summer, they try to do a little, especially at the high school level, they're trying to do credit recovery, but
Right.
you even see a little bit in the elementary
Okay.
level. But if they take those extra classes online over the summer,
Yeah.
that's gonna reduce your
Okay.
average daily membership in your fund.
Mhm.
You have another
I do.
Go ahead.
Sorry. So on page 4 of 8, where we're looking at our
Capital.
unrestricted capital outlay, is there a benefit to moving or utilizing account 2600 versus account 4000? I understand 2600 is really for the keeping schools open and comfortable and safe working condition, and 4000 is for remodeling or improving buildings. And I noticed that we had moved quite a bit of our budgeted money from that 26 to the 4,000. Is it?
It's not so much that there's a benefit in being in one line versus the other. When you do your proposed and adopted budget, the only thing you're really held accountable to is the total of the budget. But when you get to your May revision, then that's the budget that you're going to be audited against to make sure that you have sufficient numbers in each budget line. So when the auditors come through and they're like, did you spend over your budget? They're going to look at your May revision and see that you budgeted in accordance with how you're going to spend. So in June and July, you're not really as sensitive to individual budget lines. You're only sensitive to what is the total M&O you've calculated, what is the total capital you calculated. But where it is on the line, there's no ding for that. So I mean, you could put the entire thing and say, all we're paying is teacher salaries when you do your proposed budget, and then come back and change that during your revisions. There's no ding for saying that you're only going to pay teacher salaries to start the year. The only dings come in when your May revision is compared to your expenditures, and they say, were you in line with the budget? They're only looking at May revision. They don't care about any previous revisions. They don't care about your proposed and adopted. They're only looking at May revision. Proposed and adopted are most critical for the setting of the tax rate. So all items in the proposed and adopted that impact the tax rate are critical. For instance, if you have an override in place and you undercalculate your override on your proposed and adopted budget, that's it. You're set at that number. You can't increase later because the tax rate has already been set. So if you were entitled to $2 million, but you only calculated $1 million and you keyed in $1 million on that Excel file, the tax rate will be set only to generate enough for that $1 million, and you are no longer entitled to that other $1 million. You just lose it for miscalculating. So those are the items that are critical for proposed and adopted. It's not so much every individual line item being held to the different other line items. The May revision also comes into play for things like maintenance of effort, so you'll get tested to see that you're maintaining effort, like for special education spending. And so some of those lines on page 1 are going to be critical to make sure that whatever you're spending towards special education is pretty consistent with where you've been spending towards special education. If it declines between budgets or between your annual financial report from one year to the next, you have to justify it. You have to show that you had a reduced number of special education students to justify why your spending went down for one number. But those are the areas that are more critical. And so in some cases, when some of the movement looks almost arbitrary, that's the reason why, is that you're not so critical of it at the time of the proposed and adopted. You're more critical of the numbers when you get to that May revision.
Okay, and you made me think of my last question with the special ed. So on page 6 of 8, on the special projects
Yep.
page, we had full-time equivalents, FTEs, in our budget for example Title I, and now we no longer, and those, I would assume wages then are also gone. Is that because we've now moved them?
Most likely to ESSER.
Okay,
When you move between federal funds, that's the easiest move to make. Especially with, ESSER about to run out. Depending on where you're at with title, sometimes you'll see shifting expenses from title over to ESSER, as long as you have enough, as long as wherever you're at on title isn't going to exceed the caps on carry forward, you might see some of that movement from title, out of title over in ESSER, or sometimes you see it vice versa. But you don't get tested for supplanting when it's from federal to federal. ESSER doesn't have any supplanting restrictions, but title does. So when you're shifting from federal to M&O, that's a move to be a little bit more careful with, because if you take something, let's say, out of title and you start paying for it out of M&O, you're basically stuck always paying for it out of M&O. So those are some of the other moves.
and then the ESSER funding did not require FTE numbers, because we went from having them on that report to having none. And
Yes, Member Settle, Madam President, the ESSER funds are ridiculous with the reporting. It's just not all in this file.
Okay,
They are collecting through grants management, they're collecting through survey data right now.
Yeah.
It is reporting on overload, where for every dollar you spent out of ESSER, they want you to categorize it about 15 different ways and recolor it. And how does the dollar look if it's backwards? And what if you put it sideways? How does that look? And no, the reporting is overload on ESSER right now.
But just not on this
It's just
report.
not this one. It's
Okay.
the other 27 reports are filling out right now. Are all about how we spent the ESSER and plan to spend the ESSER. And if ESSER didn't exist, what would you have done? And if we were in a parallel universe and there was no pandemic, what would you have done besides ESSER funds? And that's a bunch of other different reports. And you'll approve those in October, don't worry.
thank you.
Are there any other questions for Jeremy? Thank you so much for coming out. We appreciate it. It's been nice to see your face a few different times now.
Oh, yeah, you guys let me out while the sun's still up this time, so that's
I know.
especially because you guys are a dark
Don't
community,
jinx
so it's totally.
This meeting was almost all about you.
I was gonna say, just call me out for like a Halloween meeting, that's perfect, all dark like that all the time. But thank you guys for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you
Appreciate
so
it.
much. Okay. The board needs to vote to reconvene the regular meeting, so I motion that we reconvene the regular meeting.
I second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay. With that, we need to vote on the revised budget for the 22-23 school year. Do I have a motion?
I so move.
I second. All in favor of approving the revised budget for the 22-23 school year, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Future action, if there's something you'd like to see on a future agenda, please contact Dr. J or Krista. Dates of upcoming meetings, our next meeting will be June 7th, business meeting here at 6 p.m., and then Wednesday, June 28th, which should have a budget meeting on it. Business meeting and work study session in the Learning Center here at 5 p.m. With
With
that,
that, I move we adjourn.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So does that mean we will not have a meeting in July?
Let's
Yep.
hope not.
The late one.
Since the state passed their budget.
I need to schedule
yeah,
Krista if I'm
let's
going to be
hope this-
gone for the 28th,
Let's-
right? Just to
Yeah, and I
follow.
will be too, so let's hope.
Oh, both of you are gonna be gone on the
Yeah,
20th?
I will be.
So, but you can call in, you said.
I
right? Yes.
cannot.
yes, I can.
I will be on
Okay, so
on a
yeah,
plane.
so arrange
I
that with
cannot.
Krista. We don't do like
I know.
Zoom or anything, so
The
you
trip
have
that
this on the phone.
didn't happen for 3 years.
And I mean, I can put on if there's going to be stuff on
Yeah,
there.
you can watch it, yeah, you can watch it on there, but yeah, to actually like.
And I'll have my board packet.